A crystal glass in Alexander Vorontsov's hand reflected thousands of lights from the luxurious Metropole Hall. Each sip of champagne seemed to get stuck halfway to his heart, sinking like a stone to the pit of his stomach. He stared at his reflection in the window's mirrored surface. A flawless Brioni suit, the perfected smile he had honed during 6 years in London, the perfect mask, behind which no one could see the boy from the housing block who once only dreamed of being happy. "Sasha, where are you drifting?" Anastasia's voice brought him back to reality. Her slender fingers with their immaculate manicure rested on his sleeve. The touch was as light as a butterfly's wing, and just as foreign. "Sorry, I was thinking about the presentation." He lied with the ease that frightened even himself. Anastasia nodded knowingly. The daughter of an oil magnate, she was used to men whose minds were always occupied with business and numbers. Perhaps that's why they suited each other. Two people who had turned themselves into functions of their own ambition. Alexander glanced around the hall where their engagement party was taking place. The cream of Moscow's high society, politicians, businessmen, all smiling at him, raising their glasses to his success, to his upcoming marriage with a woman whose background opened all the right doors. So why then did this gnawing anxiety claw at him from within like a hungry rat? You achieved everything you dreamed of, he reminded himself. His own investment fund, an apartment overlooking the Moskva River, a fiancé worthy of a magazine cover. Yet these achievements felt like empty boxes wrapped in shiny paper. Sasha approached with 2 glasses of whiskey, his school friend Yegor, the only one who knew the real Alexander. "Let's step out onto the terrace." The terrace was washed by the cool May wind carrying the scent of lilacs from Alexander Garden. The city stretched below them, alive, pulsing, indifferent to his inner storms. "You look like you're at your own funeral, not your engagement," Yegor said, handing him a glass. Alexander smirked, ran his hand through his perfectly styled hair. A few strands immediately rebelled, reminding him of the unruly tuft he once wore. "Everything's going according to plan, isn't it?" He shrugged, avoiding his friend's gaze. "According to the plan you made when we were 23, when you left for London with 1 suitcase and a grudge against the world." Yegor shook his head. "People change, Sasha. Plans should too." Alexander felt something tighten in his chest. How many times had he woken up in his London flat overlooking the Thames, only to feel that same emptiness? How often had his long-sought achievements turned to ash the moment they materialized? "I invited Lyuda." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Yegor choked on his whiskey. "You what?" "I invited Lyudmila to the wedding." Alexander said it with defiance, like diving off a cliff. "Why?" Yegor's voice was thick with concern. "What are you trying to prove? What am I trying to prove?" Alexander didn't know himself. Maybe to see recognition of his success in her eyes, or to prove to himself that the past no longer held power over him. "She was part of my life." He turned away, staring at the city. "I want to show her that it all worked out, that you were right to choose your career over her," Yegor finished for him. "Sasha, listen to yourself. You're about to marry one woman, and you're inviting another just to prove something." Alexander wanted to argue, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, a vision flashed before his eyes. Sheremetyevo Airport 6 years ago. The boarding call for his flight, and Lyudmila's hand gripping his so tightly, as if she could hold him back by sheer force. "You're not answering me." Yegor's voice pulled him back to the present. "Why do you need this?" Alexander took a sip of whiskey, letting the burn in his throat drown the ache of memory. "I want to close this chapter," he said, parroting a phrase he had once picked up from his London therapist. "Close it or reopen it?" Yegor asked quietly. "Look at yourself, Sasha. You're standing at your own engagement and talking about another woman. Are you happy?" The question hung in the air like cigarette smoke they once secretly shared behind the school. Alexander wanted to say yes, the only right answer. But the lie stuck fast. "I'm successful," he said finally. "Isn't that the same thing?" "You know it's not," Yegor replied. Then he hesitated. "And Lyudmila, do you even realize what you'll do if she accepts your invitation? If she actually shows up?" Alexander's heart skipped a beat. Deep down, he had been certain she would refuse, that the invitation would remain a symbolic gesture, just a thought, not reality. The idea that she might actually appear in his carefully constructed new life, real of flesh and blood, not just a ghost of memory, filled him with panic. and something else he dared not name. "She won't come," he said with a confidence he didn't feel. "You don't know her now," Yegor shrugged. 6 years. That's a long time. People change. 6 years. The words echoed in his mind, a whole lifetime crammed between his departure and today. Who was she now? What did she do? Was she happy? His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out automatically and froze. A new message from a contact he hadn't opened in years but had never managed to delete. "Thank you for the invitation. I'll come." L4 words shattered his illusion of control. "What is it?" Yegor asked, noticing the change in his face. Alexander silently handed him the phone. Yegor read it and whistled. "Well, my friend, you summoned the ghost of your past?" He patted Alexander's shoulder. "The ghost has answered." Alexander gazed at the lights of nighttime Moscow, feeling the entire carefully built structure of his new life collapse inside him. What now? He didn't know. For the first time in years, the future seemed completely unpredictable. He took a deep breath, feeling a strange mix of fear and anticipation. Now we'll find out if it was all worth it. Night was thickening over the city, promising hours of hard reflection. Somewhere out there in the vast metropolis, Lyudmila too might have been looking at the same lights, holding the invitation that could change everything. Lyudmila reread the card, holding it by the tips of her fingers as though it were poisoned paper. Gold embossing, calligraphic font, cardstock so thick it seemed it could survive the apocalypse. Everything screamed of money and status, exactly what he had chased back then, leaving her broken, pregnant, and desperately alone in a cold Moscow dorm room. "Alexander Vorontsov and Anastasia Demidova request the honor of your company in sharing their joy." She smirked. Joy. As if that word meant anything to a man who could erase living love for the sake of a resume line. "Mama, what's that?" Alyosha, her 5-year-old son, appeared beside her, pressing his warm little body against her hip. Smart eyes, a perfect copy of his father's, gazed curiously at the gleaming card. Lyudmila's heart clenched. Those eyes, sometimes she couldn't look into them without feeling phantom pain. An invitation to a wedding, sweetheart. Absent-mindedly, she stroked her son's unruly hair. "Are we going? Will there be cake?" He bounced excitedly, and Lyudmila couldn't help but smile. Children had a miraculous gift for seeing simple joys where adults found only reasons for bitterness. "I don't know, Bunny." She crouched down to meet his eyes at the same level. "This is difficult." A whimpering sound came from the next room. Mashenka had woken up. Lyudmila set the invitation aside and hurried to her daughter. The little girl was sitting in her crib. Her dark curls were tousled from sleep, her cheeks wet with tears. "Matushka," the little girl whispered in a mixture of Russian and Tatar, as her grandmother, Lyudmila's mother, had taught her. "I dreamed of the sea." Lyudmila scooped her daughter into her arms, inhaling the familiar scent of her child's hair. Mashenka was a copy of her mother. The same cheekbones, the shape of her eyes, the stubborn chin, a legacy of the women of Kroda who survived against all odds. "Will you be able to look them in the eye?" Her mother's voice sounded in her head. After everything that had happened, Lyudmila held her daughter tighter, feeling the little heart beating next to her own. 6 years ago, standing in the airport, she hadn't found the courage to tell Alexander about the pregnancy. Something, pride or intuition, had stopped her. And now, looking at her children, she understood it had been a gift from fate. If he had stayed out of a sense of duty, they would all have been unhappy. She sat Mashenka down next to Alyosha at the table and poured milk into their cups with cartoon characters on them. An ordinary morning, her small universe, which she had built herself, without him, against all odds. The invitation lay on the edge of the table, its gold embossing glinting in the morning sun, a tiny bomb capable of destroying the world she had built so arduously. "You didn't even tell him," the voice of conscience whispered. "He has a right to know. But did he?" The man who chose a career over love, the man who hadn't tried to contact her once in 6 years to see how she was. Lyudmila walked to the window. Their apartment on Chisty Prudy was small, but it was theirs, bought with money earned from translations and tutoring while she finished her studies with a newborn in her arms. Every square meter of this home was a testament to her strength and perseverance. "I'll go." The decision came suddenly, like jumping off a cliff, and I'll go and look him in the eye, and I'll take the children with me. After all, sooner or later, the truth always finds its way into the light. The Arkhangelskoye estate basked in the May sun. like a film set for a movie about a beautiful life. Lines of expensive cars, ladies in hats resembling exotic birds, men in suits costing as much as a small apartment. Lyudmila stood by the gates, holding Alyosha and Mashenka tightly by the hands, feeling like an uninvited guest at someone else's celebration of life. "It's like a fairy tale here, right?" Alyosha whispered, mesmerized by the fountains and blooming flower beds. Mashenka pressed against her leg, slightly frightened by the noise and glitter. "Yes, my dear." Lyudmila swallowed the lump in her throat. "Like a fairy tale from which she had been written out 6 years ago. Now she was returning, but no longer that naive girl, but a woman who had known both pain and strength, and the joy of motherhood. She walked along the marble-paved path, feeling the guests' eyes on her. Her simple ivory linen dress, bought in a small shop on Maroseka, looked rustic and out of place among the glitter of brand-name outfits. But she walked straight, with her head held high, as her grandmother had taught her. Never show that you're hurt. Keep your back straight even if everything inside is burning. Somewhere deep within the estate, an orchestra was playing. The live music wafted through the park, mingling with birdsong and the quiet hum of voices. Mashenka began to dance. Her childish spontaneity eased Lyudmila's inner tension. The guests were taking their seats in the snow-white chairs before an elegant arch adorned with live flowers. There, in an hour, Alexander was to say yes to another woman. Lyudmila stopped, uncertain. What was she doing here? Why had she come? "Lyudochka," a familiar voice made her turn. Yegor, the same as ever, though slightly heavier in a strict suit, faintly reminiscent of his student self. "You came after all?" His eyes showed surprise and something else, as if he knew more than he was saying. "I came," she smiled, feeling a strange relief at meeting someone from her past life. "Meet Alyosha and Mashenka, my children." She said it simply, without drama, but she saw Yegor's pupils dilate, saw him looking from the children to her and back, instantly reading the obvious resemblance between Alyosha and his former friend. "Yours?" he stammered, unable to finish the sentence. "Yes," she nodded. "Mine. And his... he knows?" Yegor lowered his voice, though the children were already distracted by a butterfly fluttering over a rose bush. "No," Lyudmila shook her head. "That's what I wanted to tell him at the airport. What he didn't want to hear." Yegor ran a hand over his face as if trying to wipe away the shock. "Lyuda, do you realize what's about to happen? Do you know what you're doing?" She looked at her children, at Alyosha, so like his father, and at Mashenka with her stubborn chin. Children who had grown up without a father but surrounded by love, her little warriors. "I understand," she said quietly. "The time for truth has come, Yegor, whatever it may be." Alexander stood by the window in the groom's room, absently adjusting his cuffs. The man looking back at him from the mirror was one he barely recognized, groomed, confident, with a perfect haircut and empty eyes. "Do you really want this?" he asked himself for the 100th time that morning. The phone in his pocket was silent. He checked it every 5 minutes, expecting what? A message from Lyudmila, a call from heaven granting him permission for his doubts. The door opened, and Yegor entered. His face was pale, as if he'd seen a ghost. "She's here," he said without preamble. Alexander's heart skipped a beat, then began to pound with double the force. "Lyuda?" He didn't recognize his own voice. Yegor nodded, then took a deep breath. "Sash, there's something you need to know before you go out there." But Alexander was no longer listening. He flung the door open and strode quickly through the estate's corridors, past surprised guests and photographers, past the bewildered parents of the bride. Something was driving him forward, perhaps that very feeling he had buried 6 years ago at the airport. He saw her immediately. She was standing by the fountain. The sunlight played in her hair, making it almost golden. The same Lyuda, and yet completely different. There was an inner strength in her now, a dignity that hadn't been there before. She was beautiful. And then he noticed the children, a boy and a girl about 5 or 6 years old, a boy with an unruly mop of dark hair, and a girl with serious eyes framed by fluffy lashes. They were holding Lyudmila's hands, like 2 little anchors holding her in this world. He froze, unable to take another step. Something inside him was screaming, demanding he acknowledge the obvious, but his mind refused to accept it. "Alexander." Lyudmila uttered his name without a smile, simply stating the fact of his existence. "Lyuda," he exhaled, feeling the ground disappear from under his feet. They..." The boy raised his head. looked directly at him, and Alexander met eyes he saw every morning in the mirror, eyes he had inherited from his father, and he from his grandfather. "This is Alyosha." Lyudmila placed a hand on her son's head. "And this is Mashenka." The math was merciless. 5.5 years, 9 months ago he had stood in Sheremetyevo, choosing between love and career. He couldn't finish the sentence. The air stuck in his lungs. "Yours," she said simply, without accusation, without anger. Just a statement of fact that changed his entire life in an instant. Guests began to gravitate towards them. Out of the corner of his eye, Alexander saw Anastasia freeze, saw her father's eyes narrow, heard the ladies in expensive dresses whispering. He heard the clicks of cameras. Tomorrow this will be in all the society columns. The Vorontsov heir meets his illegitimate children at his own wedding. The scandal of the year. But it all seemed so insignificant, so distant. Only these eyes were important, the exact copy of his own, looking at him with childish curiosity and openness. "Hello," the boy said, extending a small hand. "I'm Alyosha. Are you the groom? You have a nice suit." The voice of his son, sounded so natural, so right, like a missing puzzle piece snapping into place in the picture of the world. Alexander dropped to one knee, bringing himself level with the boy, and cautiously, as if afraid of being burned, shook the outstretched hand. "Hello, Alyosha." His voice trembled. "Yes, I am the groom." The little girl hid behind her mother, but peeked out curiously, studying him with her dark eyes. Lyudmila's eyes. The eyes of the woman he had never stopped loving, no matter how hard he tried to prove it to himself. "Sasha, what's going on?" Anastasia's voice, cold and demanding, brought him back to the reality of the wedding, which was falling apart in front of 100 guests. He slowly rose to his feet, still looking at the children, his children, then shifted his gaze to Lyudmila. There was no triumph or vengeance in her eyes, only the calm dignity of a woman who had passed through fire and survived. He turned to Anastasia, to her parents, to the guests, to the photographers, to the life he had planned, to the future he had built brick by brick, and suddenly everything became crystal clear. "I'm sorry," he said to Anastasia. "There will be no wedding." A buzz of voices rose around them. The flashes of the cameras merged into one continuous line of light. But Alexander saw only the 3 people before him, the woman he had let go of 6 years ago, and the 2 children whose existence he hadn't known until this minute. "We need to talk," he said to Lyudmila, feeling one life crumble and another perhaps begin. A shadow of a smile flickered across her face, not triumphant but understanding, the smile of a woman who knew the price of mistakes and forgiveness. "Yes," she simply replied. "We need to talk." Alyosha looked at them both with a child's wisdom, as if understanding much more than he could express in words. And little Mashenka finally emerged from behind her mother's skirt and, to everyone's surprise, extended her tiny palm to Alexander. "Hello," she said seriously. "I'm Masha." And in that childish gesture, there was more forgiveness and hope than in all the words they could have said to each other. Time stretched like caramel on teeth, viscous, sticky, unbearably sweet and painful at the same time. Alexander looked at the children, and the blood in his veins turned to ice, then to fire. His body remembered what his mind refused to accept. These children were his flesh, his blood, his unrealized future. "Breathe," he reminded himself. His lungs seemed constricted, refusing to perform their basic function. The boy Alyosha tilted his head slightly to the left, exactly as his own father used to do when he didn't understand something. This gesture had been passed down in the Vorontsov family from generation to generation, a silent testimony of kinship stronger than any DNA test. "And who is this uncle, Mom?" Alyosha asked, tugging Lyudmila's hand. "Why is he looking at us like that?" Mashenka, pressed against her mother's leg, also looked up. "Is the uncle crying?" she asked quietly, pointing a little finger at Alexander's face. Only then did he realize that tears were indeed streaming down his cheeks, unbidden, out of place at a wedding turning to ruins with every second. "Alexander," Anastasia's voice, cracking on the syllable, rang out like shattered crystal. "What is happening here?" She stood rigid. The white Vera Wang dress emphasized her aristocratic pallor, and her eyes churned with something people of her circle never showed publicly: rage. "These," Alexander's voice broke, "these are my children." The admission escaped before he could think it through, as if this truth had waited too long to come to light. "You've gone mad." Anastasia took a step forward. Her perfect French manicure dug into his sleeve. "How can you say that? You're seeing these children for the first time in your life." "Your children?" Alyosha repeated, and his eyes, God, those eyes were an exact copy of Grandmother Vorontsova's, widened. "You are our dad." The world froze. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. 3 words, spoken in a child's voice, destroyed everything Alexander had built over 6 years. Or perhaps they built something that was long overdue. "Are you a con artist?" Anastasia hissed, turning to Lyudmila. Her perfect socialite face was distorted, revealing what was usually hidden behind a mask of upbringing and money. "This is a setup. You dragged your brats here to ruin our wedding." Lyudmila paled, but did not retreat a single step. She instinctively shielded the children with her hands, as her mother used to do when her drunk father returned home to their small apartment in Kazan. "Don't you dare," she said quietly, but with such force that Anastasia involuntarily fell silent. "Don't you dare speak about my children like that." The guests crowded around, turning into greedy spectators of an unexpected drama. Some were filming on their phones, others whispered behind their hands. A society scandal was poised to go viral. "Nastya, please." Alexander tried to calm his bride, but she pushed his hand away. "Did you know?" Her voice trembled with fury. "All this time you knew and said nothing?" "No." He shook his head. "I didn't know. Look at him." Anastasia jabbed a finger towards Alyosha. "That bastard is your copy. Don't tell me you didn't suspect." Lyudmila felt Alyosha tense up. Her son didn't understand the words, but intonation was a universal language that children read better than adults. "Bastard," he repeated, puzzled. "What does that mean, Mom?" At that moment, Viktor Rudnev, Anastasia's father, pushed through the crowd, a man whose name was constantly on the Forbes list and mentioned in hushed tones in the Kremlin corridors. His face resembled a thundercloud. "Vorontsov," he said with cold fury. "If this is some kind of joke, it's a very, very bad one." Alexander straightened up. His years in the city had taught him to take a hit. But now, something far more important than business reputation was at stake. "This is not a joke, Viktor Ivanovich." He spoke calmly, though everything inside him was shaking. "I just found out myself. And you believe it?" Rudnev nodded contemptuously towards Lyudmila. "This woman, does she have proof? Documents? DNA tests?" Mashenka began to cry softly, frightened by the loud voices and the tension saturating the air. Lyudmila picked her up and held her close. "Hush, my doll, it's okay," she whispered in Tatar, ancient words of comfort passed from mother to daughter in their family for generations. "Balake, Yorajim, my little heart, everything will be fine." Anastasia laughed a sharp, unnatural laugh, brilliant, now with ethnic flavor. "Maybe you'll dance for us, little gypsy, before you start extorting money?" Lyudmila closed her eyes, feeling a sharp pain pierce her chest. The same contempt, the same words, the same tone. She had heard it all her life. In school, when other children teased her for her wrong surname. At university, when a professor expressed surprise at her success. Well, even Tatar girls can be smart. At job interviews, when they asked if her faith would interfere with working on weekends. "Don't you dare cry," her grandmother's voice whispered in her head. "Don't give them that pleasure." She opened her eyes and met Anastasia's gaze. "My name is Lyudmila Kakimova," she said clearly. "I am a graduate of the Mgimo School of International Relations. I speak 5 languages and am raising 2 wonderful children. I deserve respect, if only because I am a human being." Her words hung in the air, simple yet so weighty that even Rudnev fell silent for a moment. "You promised us millions," Rudnev hissed, turning back to Alexander. "Connections in London, contracts with the Arabs. And now what? Everything down the drain because of some—" "Careful." Alexander's voice turned to ice. "Watch your words, Viktor Ivanovich." Rudnev narrowed his eyes. "Do you realize who you're dealing with, boy? I can destroy you with one phone call. Your fund, your investors, your reputation, all will turn to dust." Alexander felt something ancient awaken within him, a protective rage, a readiness to fight for his own, the genes of hunters who lived in deerskins when the Rudnev's ancestors hadn't yet learned to make fire. "Perhaps," he nodded. "But today I learned that I have children, and that is infinitely more important than any money or connections." "Sasha!" Anastasia exclaimed, grabbing the lapel of his jacket. "Are you really leaving me, our wedding, our future because of this?" He gently removed her hands. "I'm sorry, Nastya." There will be no wedding." The sound of a slap cut through the air. Alexander's cheek burned, but the pain was sobering. After years in the financial world, accustomed to numbers, charts, and predictable risks, he was now stepping into the unknown. And strangely, for the first time in many years, he felt alive. Rudnev stepped forward, his face crimson. "I will destroy you, you pup. You'll be out of the Forbes list, out of the city. No decent house will accept you. You'll end up a bum." Alexander looked at him and suddenly understood. The ghost of Rudnev's father, a Soviet factory foreman, had never released his son, despite all the billions. The fear of poverty had driven him his whole life like a rabid dog, never allowing him to stop and simply live. "You know, Viktor Ivanovich," he almost smiled, "one shouldn't fear poverty. One should fear the emptiness that remains when money doesn't bring happiness." The audience gasped. No one dared speak to Rudnev like that, a man whose fortune was estimated at a third of the annual budget of a small European country. "You will regret this," the oligarch hissed, turning away. "Let's go, Anastasia, immediately." But Anastasia, unexpectedly for everyone, remained standing her ground. "Papa," she said quietly, "why do you always decide for me?" Rudnev froze as if electrocuted. "What? I'm sorry," I asked. A strange firmness entered her voice. "Why do you always decide for me? Who to love, who to be friends with, who to marry?" Alexander looked at her in surprise. In 3 years of dating, he had never seen Anastasia contradict her father. "Because I know what's best for you," Rudnev snapped. "Now let's go." "No." Anastasia shook her head. "I'm sorry, Sasha. This isn't how I imagined our wedding. But you know," she glanced at Lyudmila and the children, "maybe it's for the best. I wanted a successful marriage, but you seem to still love her." She turned to the guests. "Thank you for coming. There will be no wedding, but the banquet is paid for. Enjoy the buffet." And, holding her head high, Anastasia Rudneva walked away, leaving her father choking on impotent rage. "And now explain to me," Alyosha said quietly, tugging his mother's hand. "Is that uncle really our dad?" The guests dispersed around the estate grounds. Some indeed headed for the set tables, others gathered in small groups, discussing the scandal of the century. Lyudmila knelt down, bringing herself to her son's eye level. "Yes," she nodded. "He is your father. Why didn't he live with us?" the boy asked seriously. "Didn't he love us?" Alexander, standing nearby, felt the simple, childish question hit him harder than any of Rudnev's threats. "He didn't know about you," Lyudmila replied softly. "He went very far away when you were still very small. In my tummy," Alyosha frowned, processing the information. "And will he live with us now?" he asked with unexpected practicality. "We don't have much space. He'll have to sleep on the sofa or buy a camp bed." Lyudmila couldn't help but laugh, feeling the tension of the last few hours release with that laughter. The sound was so unexpected and so sincere that Alexander suddenly realized he had missed it for all 6 years. A laugh that wasn't social politeness or a reaction to a good joke, but a simple expression of pure joy in life. "Alyoshenka," she hugged her son. "It's very complicated. Adults complicate everything. We need to talk first." Mashenka, still clutching her dress, suddenly reached out and touched Alexander's cheek. "Why are you crying?" she asked, looking at him with huge eyes the color of dark chocolate, Lyudmila's eyes. "Because I'm happy," he answered sincerely, "and very, very upset that I didn't know about you earlier." "It's like when you get ice cream but drop it," the girl clarified philosophically. Happiness and disappointment together. Alexander couldn't help but laugh through his tears. This 5-year-old girl had just described his entire life with one childish metaphor. "Yes," he nodded. "Very similar. Lyuda," he turned to her. "We really do need to talk. Can we get out of here?" She nodded, picking up Mashenka and taking Alyosha by the hand. "Your car?" she asked practically. "To hell with the car," he shook his head. "Let's go to the bus stop like in the old days, remember?" And then, as if overcoming an invisible barrier, he reached out and almost timidly touched her cheek with a light, weightless touch that made both of them catch their breath. 6 years and 9 months ago. Sparrow Hills. "Imagine, how will we live in 10 years?" Lyudmila asked, lying on a spread-out blanket and looking at the evening sky. "I want a small house, just ours, with a garden where apple trees grow, like at my grandmother's in the village." Alexander lay next to her, their pinky fingers touching, an almost innocent touch that sent shivers down his skin. "And I want us to have 2 children," he said, turning his head to meet her gaze. "A boy and a girl. Why like that?" She smiled. A daughter will look like you, he said with such certainty it took her breath away. With your eyes and your spirit. And you're not afraid? She laughed. Two stubborn Kakimova women in the house? They will be Vorontsov women, he shrugged. And no, I'm not afraid. I want our children to be strong, like you. She rolled onto her side, propping her head on her hand and studying his face so seriously as if trying to memorize every feature. And what if it doesn't work out? She asked quietly. If we can't afford that house? If it's hard? He plucked a blade of grass and thoughtfully twirled it between his fingers. You know, I think happiness isn't about living without problems, but about solving them together with the one you love. She smiled that special smile she reserved only for him, and he thought that for that smile, he was ready to move mountains. You are very wise, Sasha Vorontsov. She touched his cheek with her fingertips. For an economics major, and you are very beautiful, Lyudmila Kakimova. He caught her hand and pressed it to his lips. For an international relations major, they laughed easily, carefreely, as only the very young and very much in love can laugh, confident that the whole world lay at their feet and the future would only be bright. The first stars were lighting up over Moscow. Ahead was a whole night, a whole life, and they were sure they would spend it together. Do you remember Sparrow Hills? Alexander asked as they got on the bus. The children settled by the window, mesmerized by the city passing by. I remember, Lyudmila nodded. We dreamed of a house with an apple orchard and 2 children. He glanced at Alyosha and Mashenka, a boy and a girl. She gave a faint smile. Life sometimes grants wishes in a very strange way. He carefully covered her hand with his. She didn't pull away. I don't deserve this, he said quietly. You raised them alone, handled everything, and You made a choice, she shrugged. So did I. We both have to live with the consequences. He looked at the children, his children, whom he hadn't known until today. A miracle made flesh and blood, his second chance at a real life. I'm not asking for anything I don't have a right to, he said softly. I can be a part of their life, if you allow it. Lyudmila looked out the window for a long time at Moscow rushing past, the city that had seen them as love-struck students, witnessed their breakup, and was now observing their reunion. You know, she finally said, my grandfather used to say, Eskidus dosman bulmas. An old friend won't become an enemy. What does that mean? He asked, captivated by the melody of the unfamiliar words. It means we all get a second chance, she turned to him. Even you, Sasha Vorontsov. Mashenka, as if sensing the importance of the moment, suddenly began to sing in a thin, childish voice, a lullaby in a mixture of Russian and Tatar that Lyudmila used to sing to them in the evenings. A song about stars, a mother's love, and the road home. The bus drove through evening Moscow. Inside it, a man, a woman, and 2 children. Not quite a conventional family, but perhaps the one that was meant to be all along. In Oiga Kaitik, Lyudmila whispered when Mashenka finished singing. What does that mean? Asked Alexander. Let's go home? She smiled. To where the apple trees are waiting for us. And he thought that the 6 years spent chasing mirages had finally led him to a real life, a real home, a real love. Lyudmila's apartment greeted them with the scent of cinnamon and mint tea, the aromas of childhood that she had brought from her grandmother's house in Kazan as her most valuable inheritance. The cramped rooms were filled with light, not from expensive lamps, but from children's drawings on the walls, well-worn books with dog-eared pages, and plants stretching towards the windows. Here, every object had its own story, its own soul. Alexander stopped on the threshold, as if afraid to disturb the fragile equilibrium of this world. A world built without him, in spite of him, despite all the difficulties he would never fully know. Come in, Lyudmila said, taking the jacket from Mashenka's shoulders. This is yours now, too. She hesitated. Not the home, of course, but the place where your children live. Alyosha examined Alexander with the unconcealed curiosity of an explorer who has discovered a new species. His gaze held no resentment, no prejudice, only a thirst to understand the unknown. Do you have a car? He asked without preamble, sitting on the worn-out sofa and swinging his feet in superhero socks. And do you really live in London? And do people there really carry umbrellas like Mary Poppins? Alexander sat down next to him, leaving a space between them, not too close to scare him, but not too far, afraid to miss a single moment. Yes, I have a car, he answered, trying to speak calmly, though his heart threatened to jump out of his chest. "And yes, I lived in London, but not everyone carries umbrellas, though it does rain a lot. And have you seen Big Ben?" The boy's eyes lit up. "Mom and I watched a cartoon about Paddington. Big Ben was in it." "Seen it, of course," Alexander nodded. "I even went inside. There are huge clock mechanisms there, can you imagine? Wheels the size of a person." "Wow!" Alyosha jumped up. "Mashka, hear that? Inside Big Ben there are wheels as big as a person." Mashenka, who was fiddling with a doll in the corner of the room, looked up. Unlike her brother, she was wary, studying the stranger from under her brows. In this small figure, Alexander saw Lyudmila, the very one he had met in their first year of university. The same stubborn chin, the same furrow between her brows when she concentrated. "And who are you?" the girl asked directly, with the disarming honesty only children and very wise elders possess. "Why did you come?" The question, simple and complex at the same time, hung in the air. Lyudmila, pouring tea in the kitchen, froze with the teapot in her hand. Alexander felt his throat go dry. How to explain to a 5-year-old something he didn't understand himself? How to tell of fears, ambitions, youthful mistakes, decisions made in moments of weakness, the price one pays for every choice? He stammered, looking into his daughter's demanding eyes. "I am your papa, Masha." She frowned, processing the information. "But we don't have a papa," she said with childlike ruthless logic. "Mom says he..." "Komandirovka." She pronounced the word syllable by syllable, clearly repeating what she'd heard from adults. "I was on a komandirovka." He tried to smile, but it came out crooked, a very long one. "But now I'm back. Forever?" Alyosha immediately asked, moving closer. "Will you live with us now?" Lyudmila set the cups on the coffee table with such force that tea splashed onto the worn wooden surface. The dark stain spread like a symbol of all the unspoken things between them. "That's a very complicated question, sweetheart," she said, sitting next to her son and dabbing the stain with a napkin. "The adults have a lot to discuss." "But he is our papa," Alyosha repeated stubbornly. "You've known him for a long time. You told Grandma that he loved you once." Lyudmila paled, then blushed, the way children remember every casually dropped word, every involuntary sigh, every unbidden tear. "It's both a blessing and a curse of motherhood. Yes, he loved me once," she forced a smile, "a long time ago. In another life. Those words hit Alexander harder than a physical blow. That other life was the 6 years he spent chasing the ghost of success in London's fogs, while she alone dealt with morning sickness, childbirth, sleepless nights, first steps, words, illnesses, with everything they were supposed to handle together. The doorbell rang unexpectedly sharply, making everyone jump. Lyudmila stood up, mechanically smoothing her hair, an ingrained habit of looking composed even when the world was crumbling around her. "That's probably your mother," she said to Alexander, not meeting his eyes. "I called her while you were in the bathroom." He nodded, not knowing whether to thank her or be angry at this decision. Olga Vorontsova, his mother, deserved to know the truth, but he wasn't ready for this meeting. Not like this, not now, not after everything that had happened. When Lyudmila opened the door, a woman stood on the threshold whom the years had not spared. Wrinkles lined her once beautiful face. Her hair, once dark, was now almost completely gray. But her posture remained straight, the signature bearing of the Vorontsovs, which neither years nor circumstances could break. "Lyudochka," exhaled Olga Pavlovna, hugging Lyudmila with unexpected strength. "My girl." Lyudmila froze for a moment in the embrace, then went limp, allowing the unfamiliar warmth to penetrate the armor she had forged over years of solitude. "Olga Pavlovna," she whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. You are not the one who should be asking for forgiveness." The woman shook her head. She entered the apartment, and her gaze instantly found the children. Alyosha stood up, straightening his back, so small and so serious, ready to defend his sister and mother, as he always had, as he had learned to do without a father's example. "Hello," he said clearly. "I am Alexei, and who are you?" Olga Pavlovna pressed a hand to her mouth, unable to contain her emotions. In this little person she saw her husband, her son, her father, the entire Vorontsov line, continued against all odds. "I am your grandmother, little one," she said, kneeling to be at eye level with her grandson. "Your papa's mother. We have a grandma," Mashenka chimed in, peeking out from behind her brother. "She lives in Kazan and makes kekchpokmak. Can you make them?" Olga Pavlovna laughed through her tears. No, Sunshine, I don't know how to make echpokmak, but I can learn if you show me. They are Tatar pies, Mashenka explained importantly, with meat and potatoes. Very tasty. I'm sure they are delicious. Olga Pavlovna nodded. May I hug you? Alyosha looked at his mother, seeking confirmation that this unfamiliar woman could be trusted. Lyudmila nodded, and the boy stepped into the embrace of his newfound grandmother. Mashenka hesitated for a second, then also allowed herself to be hugged, stiffly at first, then more freely, intuitively responding to the sincere love. Alexander watched this scene, feeling a wave of shame mixed with hope rising inside him. His mother, the woman who had survived her husband's early death and raised her son alone, was now holding his children in her arms. Children he hadn't known, hadn't seen, hadn't raised, and somewhere on the top shelves of her apartment, toys she had never given away were surely stored, believing that one day she would have grandchildren. Sasha, Olga Pavlovna raised her eyes to him, full of both reproach and forgiveness. How did this happen? He shook his head, finding no words. How to explain that ambition had eclipsed everything, that a career seemed the only way to prove his worth, that the fear of poverty, the fear of being nothing, the fear of repeating his father's fate of an early death, had driven him forward, not allowing him to look back. I'm sorry, Mom, he said, the only thing that made sense now. Olga Pavlovna stood up, not releasing the grandchildren from her embrace. It's not me you should apologize to first. Her gaze darted to Lyudmila, standing by the window, proud, unbroken, having created a whole world for her children, a world where there was no place for a father because he himself had refused it. Children, Lyudmila approached Alyosha and Mashenka. Grandma Olya brought you presents. Why don't you go to your room and see what's in there? Olga Pavlovna nodded gratefully, handing the children a bag, which they carried off to the bedroom with joyful squeals. When the door closed behind them, Lyudmila turned to Alexander. Her eyes, always so warm, now resembled shards of dark ice. Well, she said quietly, but in that silence there was more strength than in shouts. Are you satisfied? Got what you wanted? A successful career, a position in society, a rich fiancé, everything you dreamed of when you left Sheremetyevo. His mother quietly went into the kitchen, intuitively understanding that this conversation needed to happen just between the two of them. Lyuda, I didn't know. He took a step towards her, but she retreated, as if his proximity burned. I swear, if I had known about the children— What? She threw her head back. What would have happened? Would you have abandoned your precious career, returned to a pregnant girl from a dormitory with an unfamiliar surname, no connections, no prospects? Don't make a fool of me, Sasha. I knew you too well. Her words, bitter as wormwood, but just hit their mark. Could he say with certainty that he would have acted differently? That at 23, blinded by ambition and a thirst to prove his worth to the world, he would have made a different choice? You didn't even try to contact me, she continued, and each word turned into a thorn piercing his conscience. 6 years, Sasha. Not a call, not a message, as if we never existed in your life. He remained silent, understanding that any justification would sound false. To say that he was afraid, that every time he dialed her number, he hung up at the last moment, that he checked her social media pages but didn't dare write, that during sleepless London nights he imagined her by his side. Do you think it was easy for me, he finally asked, to leave, to abandon everything, to start from scratch? She laughed bitterly, without a trace of mirth. Easy? She repeated. You want to talk about what's easy and what's hard? Fine. She crossed her arms over her chest, as if defending herself. Hard is when you're nauseous every morning but have to run to classes because one missed exam session means expulsion and losing your dorm room. Hard is when, in your 7th month, you're mopping floors in offices at night because a day job is no longer an option with your belly. Hard is when, in the middle of childbirth, you realize the only person holding your hand is a nurse who's paid pennies for it. Hard is when your child is sick, a fever of 40, and you can't take time off work because they'll just fire you, and then you'll have nothing to eat. Her voice trembled, but she continued, as if a dam had broken and years of unspoken pain came pouring out. But you know what's the hardest, Sasha? The hardest is when your 4-year-old son asks, Mom, why does Petya from kindergarten have a dad and we don't? And you don't know what to answer, because the truth will break his little heart, and a lie will one day turn against you. She fell silent, catching her breath. The small apartment became extraordinarily quiet, as if the very air had frozen, saturated with the pain of her words. Forgive me, he said, the only thing he could. I know it won't fix anything, but I truly... Don't. She shook her head. Don't say things you don't believe yourself. I don't need your pity or your belated apologies. Then what do you want? He asked, feeling lost. Why did you call my mother? Why did you even come to the wedding? She looked at him with a long gaze, the gaze of a woman who had been through fire and water, who had learned to survive where others would have broken. I didn't come for myself, and not even for you, she said quietly. I came for them. She nodded towards the children's room. Because no matter how you treated me, you are their father, and they have a right to know you. Let them decide for themselves, when they grow up, what place you will occupy in their lives. There was more nobility in these words than he deserved, and he understood that. In this small woman, whom he had once left for a phantom of success, there was more strength and dignity than in all the successful people he had surrounded himself with in London. You've become completely different, he said almost reverently. Motherhood changes you, she shrugged. When two little lives depend on you, you either become stronger or you break. I had no choice. Laughter came from the children's room, pure, carefree laughter of children unburdened by adult dramas and past pain. That sound, like a ray of sunshine, cut through the heavy atmosphere between them. What now? Alexander asked. What will happen to all of us? Lyudmila walked to the window, looking out at the courtyard where other children were playing, where life went on as usual despite the dramas unfolding behind closed doors. I don't know, she answered honestly. But whatever happens between us, you must be in their lives if you truly want that. I want... He said it with such conviction that she involuntarily turned around. More than anything in life. She nodded, as if making an important decision. Then we will have to learn to be not together, but alongside each other. For them. And if... He hesitated, not daring to say what suddenly seemed so obvious, so right. And if we try to be together too? She shook her head, not sharply, not angrily, but firmly. No, Sasha, too much water has flowed under the bridge. I am not that naive girl, and you are not that boy. We can learn to be good parents to our children, but not partners to each other. There was no hatred in her eyes, only the calm resolve of a woman who knew her own worth. A woman who had learned at too high a cost to rely only on herself to risk it again. I understand, he nodded, feeling a strange mix of disappointment and respect, but I will be nearby if you allow it. She looked at the door to the children's room, from where Alyosha's laughter could be heard as he told his grandmother something exciting. I'll have to allow it. They've already fallen in love with the idea of having a dad. You see, children believe in miracles and in people until given a reason not to. Her words contained both a challenge and a warning. He accepted both. Papa, look! Alyosha ran out of the room, holding a model airplane that Olga Pavlovna had brought. Grandma says it's exactly like the ones you built as a child. The word Papa, spoken so naturally, so trustingly, burned Alexander from the inside. He hadn't earned it, hadn't suffered for it through sleepless nights, hadn't worked for it with patient presence in his son's life. But Alyosha gave it freely, with the unconditional love only children are capable of. Exactly the same, he knelt down, taking the model from his son's hands. I built my first airplane when I was your age. Really? The boy's eyes shone. Will you help me build this one? There it was, the first test, the first chance to become a real father, not just a biological donor. Alexander looked at Lyudmila, silently asking for permission. Of course he will, she answered for him. Papa will stay for dinner, and you'll have time to start building it. That, Papa, from her lips sounded like a recognition of his right, like a first step towards a possible forgiveness, not for his sake, but for the children's. Mashenka, who had still been wary, approached him with a book. And will you read a bedtime story too? She asked demandingly, looking him straight in the eyes like an adult. Mom always reads before bed. He glanced at the cover, The Little Prince by Saint-Exupéry, a book he himself had loved as a child. I will definitely read it, he promised, feeling something warm spreading in his chest. If Mom allows me to stay until you fall asleep. Lyudmila met his gaze over their daughter's head. Her eyes held a whole range of emotions, wariness, distrust, hope, pain, and something else she wasn't ready to name. I allow it, she nodded. Just for tonight, and then we'll see contained. More hope than he could have expected that morning. The bridge destroyed 6 years ago couldn't be rebuilt in a day, but perhaps a new one could be started, slowly, stone by stone, day by day. "Thank you," he said simply. Olga Pavlovna came out of the children's room, watching this scene with a mixture of bitterness and joy. Her son had lost 6 years, 6 priceless years he would never get back, but perhaps there were many more ahead. "The tea is cold," Lyudmila said, heading to the kitchen. "I'll make a new pot, and I think we have some cherry pie left." "I'll help, Olga Pavlovna." His mother followed her. Alexander remained in the room with the children, his children, the words still sounding like a miracle in his ears, who were already pulling him towards their toys, their books, their world, into which he had suddenly been invited, despite everything. "You have good children," he said when Lyudmila returned with a tray. "Thank you for raising them to be like this." She froze for a moment, not expecting these words, then nodded, accepting the gratitude that was rightfully hers. "They really are good." Her voice held that special pride only a mother can feel. "Despite everything, they are growing up happy. That's the main thing." "And will Tindy be happy?" Alyosha suddenly asked, listening to the adults' conversation with childish directness. "Now that I have a mom, and a papa, and 2 grandmas." Lyudmila and Alexander looked at each other, 2 people who had once loved each other, separated by circumstances and their own decisions, now forever bound by ties stronger than marriage, their shared children. "You will," they answered simultaneously, and for the first time that long day, smiled at each other, cautiously, uncertainly, but sincerely. Evening was beginning outside. Somewhere deep in the courtyard, the first spring leaves were unfolding on the apple trees Lyudmila had planted 3 years ago, her personal little orchard, her promise to herself and the children that everything would be all right. And now, looking at her children, at their father, at this small nascent family, she allowed herself, for the first time in a long while, to believe that the promise was beginning to come true. May had exhaled, giving way to June. Moscow was drowning in greenery that pushed through even the concrete of the residential districts, stubborn as life itself. Lyudmila sat on a bench in Izmailovsky Park, watching Alyosha and Mashenka feed the ducks. Alexander appeared from around a bend in the path, carrying 4 cups of ice cream, balancing them with an unexpected dexterity for a financier. 3 weeks. That's how much time had passed since the day the wedding turned into a reunion no one had expected. 3 weeks of precarious balance, cautious steps forward, and painful retreats. Pistachio for Mashenka, chocolate for Alyosha, praline for you, and strawberry for me. Alexander distributed the ice cream, sitting on the edge of the bench, leaving an invisible but palpable distance between them, like a force field. "Thank you," Lyudmila nodded, accepting the cone. It was strange to see him in casual clothes, jeans and a t-shirt, without his perfectly tailored suits and ties. He seemed both younger and older. Younger without the corporate armor, older because life had carved lines into his face that weren't there 6 years ago. "I've rented an apartment near you," he said, looking at the children, not at her. "On Preobrazhenskaya Square, 2 metro stops away." Lyudmila started. Until now, he had been staying in a hotel, neutral territory, expensive and impersonal. "For long?" she asked, knowing the question was about more than just a rental. "I applied for a transfer to the Moscow office." He turned to her. "Permanently, Lyudo." She averted her gaze, concentrating on the melting praline. "And your career? London? Connections? All those things you left for?" He gave a bitter smile. "You know what's the funniest thing? I achieved everything I planned, and it didn't bring a drop of happiness." She was silent, swallowing a lump in her throat. How easy it would be to revel in his remorse now, in his realization of the emptiness of what he had chosen over a real life. But motherhood had taught her one important truth. There's no point in reveling in someone else's pain. There's enough of your own. "I want to be part of their lives," he continued. "A real part. Not a Sunday dad, not a wallet. A father." "Wanting is good," she replied, watching Mashenka carefully feed a piece of bread to the smallest duck, protecting it from the larger ones. "But there are conditions." He straightened up, as if preparing for business negotiations. "I'm listening. No gifts worth an apartment. No attempts to buy their love. No promises you can't keep. And most importantly," she turned to him, looking him straight in the eyes for the first time in the entire conversation. "Never disappear from their lives like you disappeared from mine. It's better not to appear at all than to leave after they've become attached to you." There was no reproach in her voice, only steel forged by years of solitude. He held her gaze, direct, demanding, piercing all the defensive barriers he had built over the years. Fair, he nodded. Other conditions? You will not insist that they take your surname. They will make that decision themselves when they are ready. Why, if they are ready? He flinched. This condition stung him more than he expected. The Vorontsov name had weight, history, open doors. But did he have the right to impose it on children he hadn't raised? Agreed, he said after a pause. Anything else? She looked at the children feeding the ducks, at Alyosha, unusually serious for his age, always ready to protect his mother and sister, at Mashenka with her stubborn chin and love for all living things, at the fruits of her labor, her blood, her sleepless nights. I am their mother, she said quietly but firmly. The main decisions remain with me, not because I'm better, but because I've been here all these years and I know them like no one else. He nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. What could he oppose to 6 years of daily struggle and love? I agree. He extended his hand. It's a fair deal. This isn't a deal, Sasha. She shook her head, ignoring his outstretched palm. This is our children's lives. He lowered his hand, feeling the full weight of his guilt. As a businessman, he was used to thinking in contracts and agreements, but a family wasn't built with signatures on paper. Mom, look! Alyosha ran up to them, pointing at a duck family swimming across the pond. See, the little ones are swimming after the mother duck, Alyosha said. She's protecting them. Like I protect you, Lyudmila thought, but aloud she only nodded. Yes, sunshine. Mothers always protect their children. And papas? The boy asked, turning to Alexander. Do papas protect too? The question, innocent in its directness, hung in the air. Alexander looked at Lyudmila, as if asking for permission to answer. They should, she said, meeting his gaze, if they are real papas. Alyosha frowned, processing this information. Will you be a real papa? He asked, looking at Alexander with that childlike seriousness that goes straight to the soul. Or like Misha from kindergarten, who only comes on holidays and brings robots? Alexander crouched down, bringing himself to his son's level. I want to be a real papa, he answered honestly. But I'll need to learn a lot. Will you help me? Alyosha thought for a moment, then nodded with the importance of a diplomat signing a peace treaty. I'll help. I know all the rules. For example, Mom doesn't like it when we stay up late, even if it's a weekend morning. Lyudmila smiled, watching this exchange. Her son possessed so much wisdom, not from books, but the kind born from observing life, a wisdom his father had lacked 6 years ago. 4 years ago. Moscow. Lyudmila stood by a payphone on the corner of Stroitly Street. The children were dozing in a double stroller. The February wind cut through her thin coat, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. The last chance, the last attempt. She had gotten the number for the London office of Alexander's company through acquaintances. The international call cost almost half her weekly earnings, but desperation gave her resolve. The dial tone in the receiver sounded different, more drawn out, as if stretching across thousands of kilometers. Morgan Stanley London office. How can I help you? Answered a female voice with a distinct British accent. Hello, Lyudmila switched to English, thanking all the gods she had specialized in international relations at university. I need to speak with Alexander Vorontsov, please. It's... She hesitated. Who was she to him? An ex-girlfriend? The mother of his child? It's very important. Mr. Vorontsov is currently in a meeting with clients. The secretary cut her off. May I ask what this is regarding? Alyosha was only a year old, and the day before, the doctors had given a diagnosis, bilateral pneumonia. Expensive antibiotics were needed, which she couldn't afford. It's personal. She swallowed the lump rising in her throat. Please, it's truly urgent. It's about a child's health. A pause. Whose child, excuse me? The secretary inquired coldly. His son, Lyudmila exhaled. Another pause, longer this time. I'm afraid you are mistaken. The voice on the other end became even more formal. Mr. Vorontsov has no children. He is engaged to Miss Catherine Holsworth, the daughter of Lord Holsworth. If you are attempting... Please, desperation sounded in Lyudmila's voice. Just tell him Lyudmila from Moscow called Kakimova. He knows me. I will pass it along, the secretary replied dryly. Leave your number. Lyudmila dictated the number of the dormitory where a former roommate was sheltering her, risking a violation of the housing rules. She stood by the payphone for another 20 minutes, hoping for a return call. Alyosha woke up and began to whimper. His fever was rising again. She needed to return to the dorm, give him the medicine, which was barely enough for the initial treatment. The return call never came. Not that day, not the next, not a week later. When Alyosha got worse and was hospitalized, Lyudmila sold the last thing she had from her previous life, the golden earrings, a birthday gift from Alexander. The very ones he had put on her ears with the words, "You will be the most beautiful mother of our children." In the hospital, she met an elderly nurse, a Tatar woman like herself. The woman listened to her story and silently took off a silver amulet from her neck, an ancient one, blackened with time. "You're again Akma, Kuzen AC," she said, placing the amulet in Lyudmila's palm. "Don't open your heart, open your eyes." An old Tatar saying, "Men come and go, but you, mother, are the greatest force on earth." That night, sitting by the bedside of her feverish son, Lyudmila made a decision to never look for Alexander again, to never ask him for help, to never allow him to know about the child's existence. A decision she broke only 6 years later, upon receiving the wedding invitation. "Papa, is this your house?" Mashanka twisted her head, examining the bright apartment on the 12th floor of a new building on Preobrazhenskaya Square. Alexander smiled, helping the children take off their shoes in the hallway. Lyudmila stood in the doorway, hesitant to enter, as if crossing the threshold of his dwelling meant acknowledging his right to his own territory in their lives. "Temporarily mine," he answered his daughter. "I'm renting it. It's bigger than ours," Alyosha noted, though his voice held no envy, only observation. "But we have an apple tree under our window," Mashenka retorted, "and swings in the yard." Lyudmila smiled, looking at her daughter. Yes, her children didn't have luxurious apartments or expensive toys, but they had something more valuable, the ability to see wealth in simple things. "I have a surprise for you," Alexander winked at the children, or rather, an introduction. He slightly opened the door to the living room, and a red, fluffy creature the size of a small fox jumped out. A golden retriever with intelligent eyes and a wagging tail froze for a second, studying the new people, then slowly approached, politely sniffing the guests. "This is Bonya," Alexander introduced, "my dog. I brought her from London last week as soon as quarantine ended." "A dog!" Mashenka squealed with delight, falling to her knees and reaching out to the animal. "A real one. Mom, look how beautiful." Alexander shot a quick glance at Lyudmila, but she nodded, a gesture meaning it's okay. She didn't say that she herself had dreamed of getting a dog for the children, but circumstances, the small apartment, long workdays, lack of help, made that dream impossible. Bonya cautiously approached the girl, sniffed the outstretched hands, then licked them, making Mashenka burst into happy laughter. Alyosha, more cautious, held back. "Does she bite?" he asked, hiding his hands behind his back. "Never," Alexander shook his head. "She's very kind and smart. I got her as a puppy 4 years ago when—" He hesitated, meeting Lyudmila's gaze. "When he was engaged to Catherine, the daughter of a lord, when he was building a life that had no place for Lyudmila or the children he didn't know existed, when he was trying to fill the emptiness inside. Anyway, she's had special training," he finished. "You don't need to be afraid." Alyosha slowly extended his hand, letting the dog sniff it. When Bonya's warm tongue touched his fingers, the boy smiled, a rare, bright smile revealing a missing baby tooth. "She likes me," he said, surprised. "Right away." "Dogs sense good people," Alexander nodded. "It's their superpower." Lyudmila watched the scene in the hallway, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Joy at the children's happiness, pain from the understanding that this dog, this symbol of domestic comfort and love, had lived with Alexander while they struggled to survive. Hope that his desire to be part of their lives wouldn't fade, like many of his previous impulses. "I made lunch." Alexander looked at her questioningly. "Will you stay?" She was about to refuse. She was going to say the children could spend the day with him, and she would pick them up in the evening, that she had work to do, an article to translate for a medical journal. The deadline was approaching. But something in the expression of his eyes, the uncertainty, the hope, the fear of rejection, made her change her mind. "Only if you didn't make risotto," she replied, taking off her jacket. "You always overcooked the rice." He laughed, sincerely, with relief. "Pasta with seafood. I took lessons from a real Italian in London." Well, she raised an eyebrow. "Alexander Vorontsov, the financial wunderkind, learned to cook." "I learned a lot of things," he replied seriously. "For example, that money can't replace family." Her smile faded. Too early for such conversations. Too much unspoken pain stood between them. "Kids, wash your hands and come to the table," she commanded, stepping over the apartment's threshold. "Let's check what your papa has learned besides making money." When the children finally fell asleep, Alyosha on the living room sofa, Mashenka curled up next to Bonya on a huge dog bed, Alexander and Lyudmila stepped out onto the balcony. Nighttime Moscow spread out before them. A sea of lights, resembling a starry sky, tipped onto the earth. "Thank you for staying," he said, handing her a glass of wine. "I know it wasn't easy." She accepted the glass but didn't drink. "Why are there no photos of them?" she asked instead of answering. "You could have found me on social media, seen their pictures, gotten interested." He looked away. "I did look. Your account was private. And the photos that were public, there were no children on them." She nodded. That was true. After the phone call incident, she had become paranoid about protecting her privacy. Any hint of the children's existence vanished from public view. "But you could have asked mutual acquaintances," she insisted. "Igor, for example." "I asked once," he admitted. "About 3 years ago. He said you were happy and asked me to leave you alone. I decided you had gotten married, built a new life." She smirked. "And you were glad to think that, weren't you? It freed you from the guilt." He didn't deny it. That was also true. "I'm a coward, Lyudo," he said quietly. "Always have been. Behind all the ambition, behind all that race, the success, the money. Just fear. Fear of not meeting expectations, not reaching the goal, not being good enough. Fear of being like your father?" she asked, finally taking a sip of wine. He flinched. She had always seen right through him, always understood what he himself didn't dare admit. "Yes," he nodded. "My father was a good man, kind, honest, and he died at 40, leaving Mom with debts and empty promises. I swore to myself that I would never be so vulnerable, that you would protect yourself from all misfortunes with money and connections." She finished for him. "It sounds pathetic, I know." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she remembered from their university days when he was nervous, worried, didn't know what to say. "Not pathetic," she shook her head, humanely. "But you know the irony? By insuring yourself against one fate, you voluntarily chose another. Your father lived a short life, but it had real love in it. And you were going to live a long one, filled with what? Business lunches? Golf on weekends? Business trips?" He was silent, looking at the city lights. Once, these lights had seemed like a symbol of his goal, power, success, recognition. Now he saw in them only a reflection of the emptiness that had threatened to consume his whole life. "You know what's the most terrifying thing?" he finally said. "I almost married a woman I didn't love just because she fit my status," Alexander said, his voice low. "Nastya wasn't a bad person. She was just part of the plan. Like the expensive watch, like the specific brand of car. I turned my life into a business strategy." Lyudmila looked at him with a long, penetrating gaze. "And now," he gave a faint smile, "now I know that real life isn't made of plans. It's made of Alyosha's laughter when he builds a tower of blocks, of the way Mashenka closes her eyes in pleasure while eating ice cream, of 1,000 little moments you can't buy for any amount of money." She turned away, hiding the sudden tears that welled up. This new Alexander, vulnerable, sincere, talking about feelings, was more dangerous than the old one. To the old one, she could oppose her anger, her resentment. This one made her want to believe. "Forgive me," he said suddenly, taking a step towards her. "For everything. For not staying, for not looking for you, for not being there when they were born, when they were sick, when they took their first steps. For everything I don't deserve to get back." She closed her eyes, feeling the internal walls she had so carefully built over the years cracking at the seams. "I can't forgive you," she answered honestly. "Not now. Maybe never. But I can allow you to be a father to them, if you truly want that." He nodded. "I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I promise I won't let them down, even if you and I are not meant to be." The ringing of his phone cut him off mid-sentence. The number was unfamiliar but had a Moscow area code. "Excuse me," he picked up. "Yes?" A second passed. 2, 3. His face changed, as if turning into a mask. "I'm listening," he said, moving to the far corner of the balcony. Lyudmila watched him, feeling the return of a long-forgotten sensation, an intuitive understanding that something important was happening, something that could alter the fragile equilibrium of their new reality. "This is unacceptable," Alexander's voice dropped to an icy whisper. "I'm not going to discuss it. Another pause. He listened, gripping the phone tighter with each passing moment. "Never," he stated flatly. "Do what you want. I'm not coming back." He ended the call and turned to Lyudmila. His face was pale but resolute. "Nasya?" she asked, already knowing the answer. He nodded. "She's threatening to destroy my fund. Her father has connections in financial circles. If he decides," he trailed off, "it doesn't matter. What does she want?" Lyudmila moved closer, intuitively sensing the answer. "For me to come back, to forget about you, to continue the engagement as if nothing happened." Lyudmila took a step back, feeling nausea rise in her throat. There it was, the test, the real proof of what they had both learned over the years. "And what will you do?" she asked quietly. He looked at her with a long gaze, the gaze of a person making a decision that would define the rest of his life, the decision he should have made 6 years ago. The suitcase, bought 6 years ago on sale at Ashan, obediently accepted its contents: children's superhero t-shirts, jeans worn thin at the knees, well-loved books with dog-eared corners. Lyudmila packed them methodically, carefully, as she did everything in her life, with the measured pace developed only by single mothers who know they have no right to make a mistake. Morning streamed through the loosely drawn curtains, painting stripes of light on the worn parquet floor. The silence was deafening, that special silence of an apartment preparing to say goodbye to its inhabitants. 3 tickets to Kazan lay on the dresser, 3 thin rectangles of paper, a promise of a new beginning, or an escape. She hadn't yet decided what to call what she was doing. Her phone vibrated again, the 6th time that morning. Alexander. She didn't answer. A week had passed since that night on the balcony, since that phone call from Anastasia. A week of turmoil, doubts, sleepless nights, a week in which she had made the most difficult decision since deciding to bear and raise the children alone. "Who do you believe?" she asked herself, folding clothes into the suitcase. "His words or your experience?" Experience screamed, "Run, run, before he chooses his career over you again, before the children get too attached, before you yourself start believing in this fairy tale of a reunited family." What did she know for sure? That Anastasia had threatened to ruin his business? That the Rudnevs had the connections to do it? That sooner or later he would face a choice? Again. And then what? Another 6 years alone with the pain. Only now that pain would be doubled, multiplied by 2 children who had already started calling him Papa. No, not again. Not my children. She took a small box from the closet, a simple wooden casket bought at a market in Kazan. Inside was everything that remained of her former life. A few photos of her and Alexander laughing, hugging against the backdrop of Mgimo. A dried rose from their first date, a note in his handwriting. "And will love you until the Moskva River stops flowing." Empty words. The Moskva River still flowed, but the love had stopped somewhere over the Atlantic, halfway to London. "Mom!" Alyosha's voice pulled her from her memories. He stood in the doorway, clutching a worn-out teddy bear to his chest, the only toy he had taken from Alexander's apartment the day they met Banya. "Are we really leaving?" She crouched down to his level. "Yes, sunshine. We're going to Grandma Goosal's. Remember how nice it is there in the summer? The river, the forest, fresh tarmac, for breakfast." "And Papa?" The child's eyes held unshed tears. "Is he coming with us?" She swallowed the lump in her throat. Just 1 month. That's all it had taken for Alexander to become Papa in their lives. Reading bedtime stories, building with Legos, teaching them to ride a bike. All those little, priceless moments he had missed over 6 years, he had tried to cram into 30 days of feverish fatherhood. "No, sweetie. Papa is staying in Moscow. He has business here." Alyosha frowned, processing the information with that unchildlike seriousness that always frightened Lyudmila. "Will he forget us?" he asked quietly. "Like he did when he went to London?" Her heart ached. How did he know that? She had never. Alexander's mother, of course. Olga Pavlovna had spent all her free time with the grandchildren, making up for lost years, telling them stories of the Vorontsov family, a history of which they were a part. Whether Lyudmila wanted it or not, "I don't think he will forget you," she chose her words carefully. "But, you know, adults sometimes get confused, and they need time to figure things out." "Aren't you confused now, Mom?" Alyosha asked unexpectedly. She froze, struck by his childish perceptiveness. Yes, she was confused. For the first time in 6 years, she was at a loss, not knowing what the right decision was. To run, to protect the children from potential pain, or to stay, To give them a chance at a complete family and risk their hearts? A little, she admitted, pulling her son close. But I know one thing for sure. No matter what happens, I will always be with you. Always, he nodded, accepting this promise as only a child raised with absolute certainty of a mother's love could. What about Bonya? He asked suddenly. We won't see Bonya anymore, the dog, that damned golden retriever the children had befriended, who licked their hands and fell asleep with its head on Mashenka's lap. Another attachment, another thread to be severed. Maybe someday, she began but stopped, hearing footsteps in the corridor. Mashenka stood leaning against the doorframe. Her face, usually animated, was now closed off. The same mask Lyudmila saw in the mirror every morning for 6 years. Papa is going to leave anyway, isn't he? The girl said with the disarming directness only children and the very old possess. Like in that story about the princess everyone abandons. Lyudmila's heart sank. An old Tatar fairy tale her grandmother Guzel used to tell, about a princess whose father went off to war, promising to return, but never did. A story about loss, waiting, and the keeping of promises. No sunshine, she reached out a hand to her daughter. It's just that You're lying, Mashenka cut her off, and in that word was so much childish pain, so much disappointment, that Lyudmila physically swayed. You said adults always keep their promises, and Papa promised he wouldn't leave again. Sweetie, but then we are the ones leaving, Lyudmila tried to explain. Papa is staying here. So we're abandoning him? The girl demanded, like some evil queen from a cartoon. Lyudmila closed her eyes. How do you explain the complexity of the adult world to a 3-year-old? How do you talk about fear, distrust, years of loneliness, about how sometimes you have to cut something off to preserve it, that sometimes love isn't just hugs and bedtime stories, but also protection from future pain? Mashenka, she knelt down, opening her arms. Sometimes to protect the people you love, you have to make difficult decisions, but you always said you can't run away from problems, the girl insisted, not moving, that you have to be brave and solve them. Her own words, thrown back in her face by her child's lips. Her lessons, her mantras, her principles, everything she had instilled in the children since birth. To be strong, not to give up, to believe in the best. When had she stopped believing it herself? The train to Kazan departed at 15:40 from Kazansky station. 3 hours until departure. 3 hours to pack the remnants of a life into 2 bags and a suitcase. 3 hours to leave behind the city where her children were born, where she had built her career as a translator from scratch, where she had met the only man she had ever loved. It was strange how few things truly mattered. Toys, books, clothes. They were just the outer shell of their life. The real treasures couldn't be packed away. Alyosha's laughter as he fed the ducks in the park. Mashenka's first steps towards the New Year's tree. The evenings when the 3 of them curled up under one blanket, reading stories and making up their own. Her phone vibrated again. This time the name on the screen was different. Olga Pavlovna, Alexander's mother. Lyudmila hesitated for a moment, then answered. Lyudochka. The older woman's voice sounded anxious. Is it true? You're leaving? So, Alexander had told his mother. Of course he had. She was, after all, the children's grandmother. The grandmother who had just found her grandchildren and was now losing them again. Yes, Olga Pavlovna. Lyudmila tried to speak calmly. We're going to my mother's in Kazan for the summer. It will be good for the children. Don't lie to me, girl, the elder Vorontsova interrupted her. Not to me. I see right through it. You're running away, just like I ran when his father died. Only I ran into work and you're running to another city. Lyudmila was silent. What could she say? Olga Pavlovna's perceptiveness had always frightened her. This woman, who had gone through the loss of a husband, through single motherhood, through years of struggle, saw in her a reflection of her own fate. You're afraid he'll leave. You again, aren't you? Olga Pavlovna continued. Afraid he'll choose his career, the money, that Anastasia. Afraid to trust him. And wouldn't you be afraid? The words burst out of Lyudmila. After everything? After 6 years alone? I would be afraid, the woman agreed unexpectedly. Terribly afraid. But do you know what I've learned in my life? That sometimes you have to give a person a chance, not for their sake, but for your own. I can't risk their hearts. Lyudmila shook her head, even though her interlocutor couldn't see. They just found a father. They've become attached to him. What will happen if he chooses his career, his money again? If Rudnev really destroys his business? How long will Sasha play the part of the model father before he comes to resent us for his downfall? A pause hung on the line. The pause on the line was heavy, filled with unspoken fears and hopes. You know he turned down the deal, don't you? Olga Pavlovna finally said. The contract with the Arabs, the very one he left for 6 years ago. Lyudmila froze, a half-folded T-shirt in her hands. Rudnev's threats weren't empty, the woman continued. Sasha was supposed to sign a contract with Sheikh Al Maktoum, a $1 billion agreement. But to do that, he had to return to London. For good, and he refused. He said he wouldn't leave the children. The T-shirt slipped from Lyudmila's hands, but she didn't notice. "Why didn't he tell me?" she whispered. "Because he knew you'd see it as manipulation," Olga Pavlovna answered with the ruthless honesty only mothers are capable of, as an attempt to play on your pity. You would have thought he was trying to look like a hero sacrificing his career for his family. And she was right. That's exactly how Lyudmila would have perceived it. Because 6 years of solitude had taught her not to believe in pretty words and grand gestures. "What will happen to him now?" she asked quietly. "Without this contract?" "I don't know," Olga Pavlovna answered honestly. "Maybe Rudnev will really destroy his business. Maybe he'll lose everything he built. But do you know what he told me yesterday? Mom, I already lost the most important thing once. I won't make that mistake a second time." Lyudmila closed her eyes, feeling a single tear roll down her cheek. The elder Vorontsova knew exactly where to strike, right into the heart she had so carefully protected all these years. "I have to go," she said, trying to pull herself together. "We need to catch the train." "Lyudochka," Olga Pavlovna's voice softened. "I'm not asking you to stay. I'm not asking you to forgive him or to love him again. Just give him a chance to be a father. They deserve it. He deserves it. The children deserve it." When the call ended, Lyudmila stood for a long time in the middle of the room, looking at the unpacked belongings, the tickets, the children's toys. What if Olga Pavlovna was right? What if the fear of losing again was guiding her more strongly than common sense? What if, by trying to protect the children from possible future pain, she was depriving them of present happiness? But the choice was made. The tickets were bought, the suitcases almost packed. Sometimes you just have to move forward, even if your heart is breaking with doubt. Kazansky Station buzzed like a disturbed beehive. A human sea surged, dividing into streams, merging again, spitting out those who were leaving and swallowing those who were arriving. Lyudmila held the children's hands tightly, afraid of losing them in the whirlwind. The train to Kazan departs from Platform 3. A mechanical voice from the speakers cut through the crowd noise. "Passengers are requested to take their seats." "Mom, why didn't Papa come to see us off?" Alyosha asked as they made their way to the platform. "Because I didn't tell him," she wanted to answer. "Because goodbyes only make parting harder. Because I'm a coward who wouldn't have been able to leave while looking him in the eye." He didn't know exactly when we were leaving. She lied, hating herself for it. "He has an important meeting today. We'll call him when we arrive." The boy persisted. "We'll tell him about the train and about Grandma. Of course, we'll call." She forced a smile, helping the children board the carriage. Their seats were by the window, 2 lower berths and 1 upper. Lyudmila helped the children get settled, took out juice and cookies, turned on the tablet with cartoons. Everything as usual, as it had been 1,000 times before. Only this time, they weren't leaving for a vacation, but forever. From the father they had just found, from Grandma Olya, who baked them pies every Sunday, from the dog who wagged its tail at the mere sound of their voices. Was she doing the right thing? The question gnawed at her from the inside, giving her no peace. What if running away wasn't a solution, but just a postponement of the inevitable? What if, by protecting the children from one pain, she was simply exchanging it for another? Passengers are requested to say goodbye to those seeing them off. The train departs in 5 minutes. The mechanical voice sounded again. Mashenka pressed her face against the glass, examining the platform. Her eyes, usually lively and curious, were now dim. A quiet Alyosha fiddled with the edge of his T-shirt, a gesture that appeared only when he was nervous. They sensed something was wrong. Children always do. No matter how hard adults try to hide their fears and doubts, children see right through them with their special childish vision, which adults lose along with their belief in miracles. "Mom, look," Mashenka suddenly exclaimed, coming to life and pointing her finger at the window. "It's Papa and Bonya." Lyudmila's heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be. She hadn't told anyone the departure time except Olga Pavlovna. Of course, who else? She forced herself to look out the window. There, pushing through the crowd on the platform, Alexander was running. Behind him, straining at the leash, was the golden Bonya. They were making their way through the crowd, clearly heading for their carriage. "Papa!" Alyosha shouted, jumping up from his seat and drumming on the glass. Papa, we're here." The carriage attendant gave them a disapproving look, but Lyudmila barely noticed. All her attention was fixed on the figure approaching their window. He was without a jacket, in just a shirt, despite the cool June day. His hair was disheveled, his face glistening with sweat from the run. She had last seen him like this 12 years ago, when they were taking their final university exams, and he had rushed straight from a run to bring her a lucky charm, a feather found under the windows of Moscow State University. Alexander stopped by their window, looking at Lyudmila and the children. His eyes held a plea, desperation, and something else she was afraid to name, even in her thoughts. "Let me in." His voice was barely audible through the closed window. "Lyuda, please." Mashenka was already tugging at the door handle, but Lyudmila stopped her. "You can't, sweetie. The train is about to leave." "But it's Papa," the girl protested. "He came for us." "He came to see us off," Lyudmila corrected, feeling every word stick in her throat. Alexander was shouting something to them, but the noise on the platform drowned out his words. Bunya stood on her hind legs, her front paws against the carriage wall, as if trying to reach the children. "Look at him," Alyosha said suddenly, quietly, but with that unchildlike seriousness that always made Lyudmila's heart ache. "He doesn't want to let us go, Mom. He's crying." And indeed, tears were streaming down Alexander's cheeks. He stood on the platform, looking like a lost boy rather than a successful financier, silently repeating the same word, a word Lyudmila could read on his lips without even hearing it. "Stay." The train began to move slowly, almost reluctantly, as if fate itself was giving her one last chance to change her mind. Alexander ran along the platform, not taking his eyes off the window where she and the children sat. Bunya raced beside him, a golden blur among the people. "Papa is running after us," Mashenka shouted, pressing against the glass again. Lyudmila closed her eyes, unable to watch. Why was he making it even more painful? Why couldn't he just let them go, allow them to start a new life without the fear of being abandoned again? The platform was ending. Any moment now, the train would pick up speed, and Alexander would be left behind. First a figure in the distance, then a dot on the horizon, then just a memory in the children's hearts. "Mom, stop the train," Alyosha demanded, tugging her sleeve. "Papa wants to say something." "You can't stop a train, sweetie." She shook her head. "It doesn't work that way." "But you said yourself that nothing is impossible for love," the boy exclaimed. He had thrown her own words back at her, the words she whispered to the children before bed. Her stories about how true love is stronger than circumstances. Her fairy tales about princes who overcome all obstacles for their loved ones. Her faith, which she kept in her heart, even when life proved her wrong time and again. She faltered, not knowing what to say. At that moment, Alexander appeared in the corridor of the carriage, disheveled, breathless, but determined. How had he managed to jump on the moving train? How had he convinced the attendant to let him on without a ticket? What words had he found to explain the madness of his action? "Lyuda," he stopped at their compartment, grabbing the doorframe to keep from falling as the train picked up speed. "Please, just listen to me, for 1 minute." The children looked at their father with delight. For them it was a scene from a movie, a real adventure. But Lyudmila saw a man who had already broken her heart once, a man she was afraid to trust again. "Have you lost your mind?" she said, standing up. "How did you even—" "I can't lose you again," he interrupted, taking a step towards them. "I can't, and I won't." The train swayed on a turn, and he almost fell but caught himself on a handrail. "Sasha," Lyudmila's voice was tired. "You can't just jump on a train and change everything. Life doesn't work that way." "I know," he nodded. "I know I don't deserve a second chance, that I hurt you, that I was a coward and selfish. But I've changed, Lyudo. I swear to you." "Words," she shook her head. "Just words. Not just—" He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. "Look, this is the refusal of the international contract with the Al Maktoum Holding. $1 billion, Lyuda. The contract of a lifetime." She took the document, her eyes scanning the lines of the official refusal. The names of the sheikhs, the eastern titles, the enormous sums. Everything he had once left her for. Why? Was all she could ask. Because they demanded my permanent presence in Dubai. 3 years, minimum. He looked her straight in the eye. And I promised the children I wouldn't go away again. The train was picking up speed, rhythmically clattering over the rail joints. The last Moscow suburbs floated past the window, gray concrete apartment blocks mixed with bright new buildings, like a symbol of the Russia they knew. a country of contrasts, a country of pain and hope. I'm not asking you to love me again, Alexander continued, crouching down in front of the children. I'm only asking for one thing. Let me prove that you need me, that I can be a real father, a real support. Mashenka, unable to hold back, threw her arms around his neck with the absolute trust only small children are capable of. Alyosha held back a little, cautious, as always when it came to emotions. Are you coming to Kazan with us? The boy asked seriously. To Grandma Guzul's? If Mom allows it, Alexander turned to Lyudmila, still holding Mashenka. I'll go anywhere. To the ends of the earth. Just don't push me away again. Lyudmila looked at them, at Mashenka tightly hugging her father's neck, at Alyosha watching the scene warily but hopefully, at Alexander, whose eyes held a mix of plea and determination. And what did she feel herself? Fear, of course, a deep, bone-deep fear of trusting again and being betrayed again. But there was something else, too. A weariness from the constant struggle alone, a longing for a shoulder to lean on, a timid, uncertain hope that maybe people really can change. Yorjin Akma, Kuzene Si, the old nurse's voice sounded in her memory. Don't open your heart, open your eyes. And she looked with wide open eyes at the man before her, not at the self-confident boy who had chosen a career over love, but at a man who had passed through his own desert of solitude and understood the value of real things. He was shaking not from the cold, but from the fear of losing them again. His hands, holding their daughter, were the hands of a man ready to fight for his happiness, not run from difficulties. The weather is nice in Kazan right now, she finally said. The lilacs and apple trees are blooming. He looked at her, not understanding what lay behind these words. Acceptance? Rejection? A postponement of the inevitable? Do you have a ticket to the next station? She asked practically. Or are you planning to ride all the way to Kazan as a stowaway? I didn't think that far ahead, he hesitated. I just saw the train leaving and ran. For the first time in the entire conversation, she smiled, faintly, uncertainly, but sincerely. You were always impulsive. She shook her head. Good thing you at least have your passport with you. Always. He patted his shirt pocket. After that incident at the Finnish border, remember? She remembered. Their first trip abroad together, when he'd forgotten his documents and they'd spent half a day in the transit zone making up stories for each other about who they would be in 10 years. How naive they had been, how dreamy, and how cruelly life had shattered those dreams into fragments they had spent all these years apart trying to piece back together. We need to tell the carriage attendant you're with us, Lyudmila decided, standing up, and buy you a ticket to Kazan. I don't think getting off in Muktalovo would suit you. He stammered, not believing his ears. You'll let me come with you? I'm not promising anything. Beyond this trip, she warned. No vows of eternal love, no happily ever after. Just a chance to get to know each other again. For them, she nodded towards the children, but they both knew it wasn't just for the children, it was for her too, for the woman who had carried her burden alone for 6 years and deserved at least an attempt to share it with someone else. For the girl who had once dreamed of an apple orchard and a great love that would withstand all trials. Thank you, he said simply. The train raced eastward, carrying them all into an unknown future full of fears and hopes. Ahead lay Kazan with its minarets and old streets, its river and apple orchards, with Grandma Guzul and her wisdom passed down through generations. Lyudmila didn't know what awaited them there. Would Alexander become a part of their lives, or would he run away again when things got tough? Would he learn to wake up for crying children at night, to make chicken soup at the first sign of a cold, to mend jeans torn at the knees? But today, watching him tell the children a story about a golden fish in the Kazanka River, she allowed herself to do something she hadn't done for 6 long years, to hope. Kase bati kulinda tugel, your agenda, Grandma Guzul used to say. A person's happiness is not in their hands, but in their heart. And perhaps it was time to let her heart open again. Slowly, carefully, with caution. But to open. Mashenka fell asleep in her father's arms, her head on his shoulder. Alyosha grew quiet, looking out the window at the passing landscapes. And Lyudmila thought that life, like this train, sometimes rushes at full speed, sometimes slows down on curves, sometimes stops at small stations for a breather. But the important thing is not to get off halfway, not to be afraid of sharp turns, and maybe, sometimes you need to let someone jump into your carriage while it's moving at full speed. If that person is ready to ride with you to the final station, no matter how long the road may be. Epilogue. The train moves on, carrying Lyudmila, Alexander, and their children not towards a final answer, but towards a possibility, a chance to heal old wounds and build something new on the ruins of the past. In this journey, they resemble each of us, carrying the burden of past decisions, mistakes, and missed opportunities, but also the hope that tomorrow can be different if we find the strength to trust again. What do you think? Did Lyudmila do the right thing by giving Alexander a second chance, or was his betrayal too deep to deserve forgiveness? Is it possible to build a real family on a foundation of once broken hearts? Leave your opinion in the comments. Is your story similar, or would you have acted differently? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Perhaps someone right now is facing a similar choice and searching for an answer. Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss new stories about difficult decisions, love, and forgiveness. Below this video, you'll find a playlist with all the stories from our channel. Stories that remind us that, even in the deepest darkness, you can find light if you know where to look. Yul Elbasi, Ayaka Stinda, as the Tatar wisdom goes. The beginning of the path is under your feet. Sometimes you just need to take the first step.